One myth surrounding the foundation of the Kingdom of Britain attributes it to Aeneas, one of the few inhabitants of Troy who escaped Greek devastation. So history might suggest that Elizabeth, Paris, had not only reconciled the qualities of the three goddesses, but in doing so, had followed Aeneas in refounding her nation, battered yet triumphant after a great conflict. In the 21st century, we might perceive something else. Hofnagel's canvas is divided into two distinct parts. On the left stands Elizabeth, erect and crowned, stiff in her brocaded gown, her canopy of state just visible behind, enclosed by the forbidding wall of a palace. To the right, the goddesses are posed in a bright, gentle landscape, delicately ethereal, the trees in full leaf, the grass lush. Above them, in the distance, is another palace. Not a gloomy, defensive fortress, but a turreted fantasy, a tower of delight. To my eyes, the distinction in the picture is between the past and the future. Elizabeth I reigned from 1558 to 1603. In those 45 years, something occurred in England, something which recalibrated ideas about Englishness and nationhood, and which left the country a very different place at the end of the period than at the beginning. Elizabeth herself is absolutely central to the manner in which this shift is brought about. Yet somehow the ever-burgeoning interest in the Queen and her Tudor ancestors, the miniseries, the films, the abundant literature, the documentaries, has had the effect of diminishing her, reducing her to little more than a bewigged farthingale with a mysterious sex life. The young woman confronting the classical goddesses of Hofnagel's portrait is a very different creature from the perennially frozen mask of magnificence which conventionally characterizes her reign. In the picture, Elizabeth is in motion, moving from the darkened constrictions of medievalism towards a recognizable world, one informed by the new learning the goddesses embody. She is stepping forward into the light, into the Renaissance, into a princely modernity. Nearly every biography of the Queen begins from the premise that her rule was in some way anomalous, by virtue of her gender. Often, the fact of Elizabeth's biological femininity has then been used as a basis from which to interpret nearly every aspect of her governance. In my view, this is simply wrong. Elizabeth herself was happy to play on the conventions of gender when it suited her weak and feeble woman's body to do so. But convention is not fact any more than rhetoric is reality. Arguably, contemporary conceptions of sexual difference were considerably more supple and sophisticated, and far less constricting, than those of the 21st century. Practically, Elizabeth's gender was significant in certain areas, the organization of her household, for example, or her inability to lead her troops in battle. But Elizabeth's intellectual upbringing, and particularly the influence of the new learning, gave her a princely self-image not in the least circumscribed by femininity. Elizabeth saw herself primarily as a prince, in the sense that royalty, in the perceptual model of her times, negated gender. Furthermore, it was as a modern monarch, a Renaissance prince, that Elizabeth attempted to govern and refashion her realm. Elizabeth was not primarily an exceptional woman, she was an exceptional ruler, and one way in which she became so was to envisage herself, as she once told the Venetian ambassador, as a prince from a line of princes, even where those princes were not necessarily male. Elizabeth I may have been the second of England's queens regnant, but she was descended from a tradition of ruling women in both England and Europe. What, then, were the qualities of a Renaissance prince? How can we recognize one? And how can it be claimed that Elizabeth was one? Definitions of the Renaissance itself are notorious.